Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for attending this webinar organized by Johan Cruyff Institute. We will dedicate today's session to talk about mastering MLS, building winning squads, and careers in sport management. With Quinn Thompson, he's the Senior Director of the Player Personnel at the Vancouver Whitecaps, who will provide an inside look into the intricate world of building a winning squad, enhancing competitiveness, and fostering team cohesiveness in Major Soccer League. Johannes Regier, agent of Johan Cruyff Institute in Canada, will moderate the session. And I would like to remind all the attendees that you can also participate in the conversation, typing your question to our speakers in the questions tab, and there will be a question and answers section at the end of the session as well. In case you cannot follow the whole session, you will receive the recording afterwards. So let's get started. Hi, Quinn, Johannes, good afternoon, and thank you so much for your time, especially in this busy period. And Johannes, I give you the floor and see you all at the end of the session. Thank you.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Edgar. As Edgar said, my name is Johannes Regier, and I'm based here in Vancouver. And through my company, Atlas, I represent the Johan Cruyff Institute here in Canada. And I've been involved in professional soccer for over a decade now, where I have been representing professional soccer players and have acted as a sports executive as well. And
Johannes, I'm not sure, but I cannot hear you, and I don't know if you, Quinn, can hear him.
You're on mute. You're on mute.
Yeah. There we go. Are we good now?
Yeah, we're good now. Thank you, Johannes.
Perfect. Sorry about that.
No worries.
So as I said, I have been in professional sports for a while now, and about 3 years ago, I was able to connect with Quinn as I was working with representing professional soccer players, and really what connected what I saw in him right from the beginning was his approachability and his care for the people around him. And as a senior director of player personnel, that is one of the things that you really want to focus on, right? And it really struck me of how well and how much he cared about the players and the people around him. And so Quinn is really someone that I respect a lot, that I look up a lot to, and over his time with the Whitecaps, really it has been evident from a cultural perspective. And I can say this with authority because I have been working with a player at the Whitecaps, and the feedback was that the dressing room environment at the Whitecaps was probably one of the best environments that this player had experienced in his whole career. And it's just a testament of all the work that Quinn and the whole team are doing at the Whitecaps. So then I took a little bit of time to go into some of the stats to see what, even from over the last 5 years, what the growth has been. And you guys have had an impressive 140% growth year over year of the squad value, which again is a testament of how much you guys are investing on the relationship part, but then also on building a quality and a highly competitive team, right? And this has been evidenced by back-to-back wins of the Canadian Championship, and then now also like 2 years in a row of qualifying to the playoffs. And really, you are seeing the fruit of a lot of the work that has been invested, right? So Quinn, for me, it is really an honor to have you here today, to join you in this webinar, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Johannes, and thank you to the Johan Cruyff Institute for having me. I think I speak for everybody in the organization. We're really excited to be a part of this, and me personally, it's a real treat to be here. Very, very kind words from Johannes. I think there is a lot of work that has gone on over the last few years, and we're in a good spot right now, but still a lot more work to do to get to the place that we want to be as an organization. So I put together a quick little presentation that we'll run through. So we'll kick that off. So today we're going to just quickly go over kind of my journey to my current role, and also my now current role and the process that we kind of, or as the organization kind of runs through over the last couple of years. So within that current process, it's kind of breaking it down into three things. One being the salary cap, which is pretty unique to the MLS. Roster management, how do we actually come to making decisions? How do we plan for next windows, next seasons? And then the last piece is scouting and recruitment, which is the actual identification of such players. So let's start with my journey. So I was at one point in university, my undergraduate degree, and I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. I knew that I spent a lot of time looking at sports websites, and I spent a lot of time looking at analytics websites, and I was always interested in numbers, but I didn't really know what to do and how I could make a career for myself in sports. And I was actually in 2017 lucky enough to have a conversation with Bobby Webster, who is now the general manager of the Toronto Raptors. And I think the one thing that struck me about him was he was a normal person, and the way that he talked about his players was about how much he cared about them, and that everything they do is to try to help the players be as successful as possible. And so I asked him, what did you do? And he was like, I was a basketball player, and then I got a job in marketing, and I didn't really like it, and he was working for Orlando Magic, and then he ended up getting a job at the league office. And he said, that's kind of where everything blossomed for me. And I ended up working. They were renegotiating the CBA, and he was around and became a bit of an expert in the CBA. And I was like, that's kind of interesting. So that to me, I was like, maybe I could replicate a bit of what Bobby did, but I didn't really know what that would look like. So kind of starting in 2017, after my second year at university, I ended up, knowing a person that knew a person from the Whitecaps, and I got an internship on the soccer operations side. And I think first and foremost, that opportunity it showed me, gave me real education for what the footballing landscape looked like, and what a team, an ecosystem within a sporting organization looked like. Like there's so many parts of the performance that happens on the field that we don't, most people don't see, from the medical staff to, the team admins, to the coaching staff, like the amount of work that goes on behind the scenes. So it was a really good education piece for me. My role that year that summer was mostly, driving players around, helping them get apartments, getting cars and stuff like that. But it also gave me a real appreciation for, the players are human beings. And it's and what impacts them the most is, the club has a lot of impact on the players when they get there to their performance. If you can make them feel comfortable and feel like they're part of this organization, part of this city, you get more out of them. So that was kind of my intro to it. And out of that, I thought, okay, I kind of know, I figured some stuff out. I've also figured out that I don't really want to do this for the rest of my life. I wouldn't want to be driving around guys to looking at apartments and whatnot, but it gave me actually a clear indication of what I did want to do. And one of the things that came out of it is I was always interested in data, was trying to maybe get into the sphere of analytics. So the next role that I got was actually at university. I worked with the men's hockey team. I went to the University of Western Ontario in London, Ontario, which we joke about as the good London. And that was an opportunity that I just kind of made up myself. Like I reached out to the coach and was like, "Hey, do you guys have anybody doing statistics?" They're like, what do you mean? What is that? And so I created like a worksheet, and I would track the games live. I would travel with the team. It was, a lot of sacrifice for my social life, but it was something, a good lesson for me. And I think most importantly, made me very comfortable with talking to coaching staffs and also executives, because it was every single game I was sitting there in between periods and talking to the coaches. I would give them reports after 8 games. And gave me a basic analytics background that I could take with me. So from that, I was able to find myself in an internship at the player relations department at MLS in New York City. And so I did that for a summer, and the league office at MLS is a very, very unique place, because it's really, for me, the only place you can actually understand how the MLS works. The MLS is a very complicated league with all the different rules. But if you're just working for the Whitecaps, I have no idea what Houston's doing, what New York's doing. But when you're at the league office, you can see what every other team is doing. And I was really fortunate to have a tremendous boss in Christina Labrie, who is she's now the head of the player relations department, is the vice president, and she gave me a ton of stuff to do. And I think that's one thing throughout all of these experiences I had leading to join the Whitecaps, is I had really good mentors. That even if I was an intern, they didn't treat me like an intern. They treated me like an employee, and they had me doing a lot of stuff. And so I was able to kind of build my, basic knowledge of MLS and the salary cap over that, 3-4 month period. And then the last one was at my university. They didn't have a sports conference, and so the business school had a desire to start a sports conference. And at that time, I'm Canadian. I'm from Vancouver. Ice hockey is a huge sport here. And one of the alumni of my school was actually, his name's John Chaika. He was the general manager of the Phoenix Coyotes at the time, now the Arizona Coyotes. And he was I think he was the youngest general manager in North American sports history. So he was just like a few years older than I am. And we got on a call, and he kind of had talked to me about, there's obviously a desire at the school, and would you be able to help out? And I was like, yeah, well, why not? And I think in that was an opportunity for me to lead a group. So we had, a team of 10, 15 people, and also trying to manage time, which is actually, I learned a lot about that, which is really helpful for me today, because I was taking classes. I would say maybe not focusing on classes at the time as much as I should have. Maybe I shouldn't say that, because it was like I'd be in class, and I'd just be sending, emails out to, different GMs of different sports or whatever, and having these conversations. But it was a really great experience. And I think out of all this is, for any of you that are trying to figure out what you want to do, and if you have a desire to work in sports, is that all of these things were done in university. And I think that's one thing that when we're looking to hire people is find people that took initiative. Because I think when you're in university, it's such a low risk environment. It's not like, if I was working for the men's hockey team and I didn't come up with a report, it's not like they were going to be upset with me, because their expectations are quite low. If you're an intern, the expectations, as I know we now have had interns, the expectations are quite low, but you can make what you want out of it. Once you get into a job, you're getting paid, there's expectations. So, after the Ivy Sports Management Conference, the Whitecaps actually ended up jumping in at the end of it and sponsoring the conference, and then ultimately offered me a job to come back. So at that time, that was in 2019, and in 2018, at the end of 2018, Alphonso Davies got sold to Bayern Munich. Rick Celebrini, who was the head of the medical team, a very respected person here at the organization, left for the lead role at the Golden State Warriors, and we fired our head coach, Carl Robinson. So it was an organization that was very much in flux, and you can see this is coming from a data background. This was our expected goal differential in 2018. It was not great, but not the worst. But then in 2019, when I joined the club, it was the worst in the league. So we were getting dominated. So I was kind of thinking to myself, like, is this something I really want to jump into? Like, this is kind of an organization that's had some real troubles lately. At the same time, the way I looked at it was, it's a real opportunity. There's a lot of opportunity to grow here. And knowing the organization from my internship, I knew there were tons of opportunities to bring this club to the level that us in Vancouver thought it could be at. So following that, I had a conversation with Dr. Ben Sporer, who's now the Vice President of Performance Strategy, Research, Innovation, and Dr. Johan Wint, who's the Senior Director of Analytics, Insights, and Research now. And you know, it's always good when two doctors are calling you. You feel like, okay, we got some smart guys that are joining the organization right now. And they kind of pitched me this idea, and this is an image that kind of encapsulates our performance strategy. And the idea is, rather than looking at the outcomes of games, is looking at the output. And everything in here is about what are the things that we can control to try to make the organization or the output that we put on the field as strong as possible. Now, the results may not always go our way, but all of the controllables we're controlling. So this was everything on a piece of white paper, and you're thinking, okay, well, the outcomes are not going very well, but there's a real idea and process that's being put in place for us to be successful long term. And this was kind of mapped out to me in a sustainable way of how we're going to build this. And I said, you know what, this is the right place for me. And one of the things that I really wanted to dive into was the space of analytics. So I took a job as the soccer operations specialist, which is the most kind of vague job title I've ever seen in my life. But really what that was is that I worked in our data science department for about 2 years. And coming from the league office, I was pretty excited to come in and start working on the salary cap. But I also understood at the beginning, like, that's not my role. My role is to come in here and learn about the performance strategy and how can I impact this organization within that strategy. So I knew from the beginning, one of the things that I really need to learn about was the hard skills. So I came in with my Excel track sheet that I had from working with the Western men's hockey team, and pretty quickly learned I was out of my depth. So I spent probably the first year, 6 months the first year, learning how to code in R and SQL. And honestly, I was working on, U15 beep test reports. We did a lot of stuff in Tableau, but, at the time, there were definitely days where I was a little bit like, oh, why am I doing this? But it's all was part of my education. And honestly, like, looking back on it, I'm so happy and fortunate to have a great mentor and someone like Johan, who was very patient with me. And they weren't rushing me saying, oh, okay, you came from league office, you have to do this, you have to do that. It was preparing me for whenever that opportunity came for me to execute on things like the salary cap, on our roster decisions, that I would have a skill set that would allow me to do that in an efficient way. So I did that for a couple of years, and then in 2021, our sporting director kind of approached me. His name's Axel Schuster, and he said, "Hey, I got some questions." Axel worked at Schalke before, and Mainz before that, and worked in the Bundesliga for 20 years or so. So he knew nothing about the MLS. And so when he first started, he asked me a few questions, but over time it became, more specific, going into, what does our salary cap look like next year? We're looking at transfers of players, putting together packages of, what analytically, how does that player compare to other players that have come in? What is the future transfer value? And really the reason that my relationship with Axel, in my opinion, grew so substantially is because I could turn around these reports quicker than, some of the people that have been around here for a while. And I could take my knowledge and present it in a very clear, concise way. And so ultimately, this kind of was the beginning of my shift of responsibilities to then becoming the executive analyst and shifting out of the data science space. And at that point, it was really providing support for Axel for every facet of decision making. Now, once that was kind of hit its piece of everything I could do there, Axel kind of made the decision that I need you to rather than providing me support, I need you to start getting involved in the conversation. So pretty quickly that turned into all right, you got to start negotiating these contracts, because he's like, listen, I'm reading these reports and just kind of repeating them to the agents. Let's cut out the middleman. And that's actually one of the first times I met Johannes, to be honest. So, so then this is now my current role is the senior director of player personnel. And like I said, I kind of break this down into three things. So we have the salary cap, which is and this is all kind of our decision-making framework. So the salary cap for us, provides us with an understanding of what are the financial resources we have available. We're not a club that is going to spend, we're not Miami, we're not buying Messi, we're finding, we're trying to use our money that we have efficiently. So the salary cap really for us dictates a little bit more about what financial resources we have available rather than, how much our owner is going to give us. Roster management is a really important, hard thing to describe because it's for us, it's a collective group discussion analysis of where we are and auditing the process consistently to try to figure out how do we improve. And once we kind of come up with a roadmap of how we're going to improve, then we get into scouting and recruitment, which is identifying the opportunities that are out there. Scouting and recruitment, again, is kind of like roster management. It's very open-ended in the sense that you may be looking at a player that you think is going to help us, and then the next day someone calls you with another player. And so you have to be pretty agile in the approach of scouting and recruitment. So let's jump into this. So for the salary cap, I'll try to go over this kind of briefly. The MLS salary cap is complicated. I'm happy to answer some questions later. But really the basics of it is there's two rosters. There's a senior roster, which is, most of the players that actually play. And then you have a reserve roster, which is 10 slots. And that's mostly development players coming up to your academy, maybe, a few young guys that you've gotten from different leagues around the world. But for the purposes of this, we're going to focus on the senior roster, which is about 20 players. So within this, I'm sure if you guys have followed the MLS at all, you've probably heard of the designated player spot, which is more or less, or maybe you've heard of it also through this David Beckham documentary that came out recently. That is the David Beckham rule, which is you can bring in a player and you can pay whatever you want, and they sit on your cap for that spot is allocated 12.5% of the cap for that year. The second is you have 3 spots for U22s. I'll call this the Almiron rule, which is pretty much, MLS started seeing that we had some young players, Alphonso Davies as well, that if you can transfer a guy in at a younger age, 18, 19, and develop them, then you can make a lot of money. So those are kind of like DP spots that have a bit of a difference in the rule, where you can pay whatever transfer fee, but the player's salary is capped at a certain amount. And that capped amount is actually the same as what the DP spot sits at. So they can only make this year, let's just say it's $650,000 in salary, but the transfer fee can be whatever they want. And then you have 3 to 5 target allocation slots. That's a dumbed down version of it. Really what it is you have a certain amount of money that is target allocation, and you can spend it on these certain amount of players. And traditionally those are players that are international players. And for us, when we look at those players, those are the guys that you want to get. You want to have consistent output from those players. So they may not be, your superstars, but they're the guys that, week in, week out are giving you constant performance. And then everything else is just senior roster slots. So depending on how many DPs, how many U22s, how many target allocation slots, this can vary. But let's say in general, you have 11 to 14. Now within that, you have 2 parameters that are kind of salary cap parameters to bring those cap numbers down. And that's target allocation money, which is not tradable, and general allocation money, which is tradable. So general allocation money, when you see these funny trades of players, it's always GAM that's being traded. So I'll use GAM is kind of the acronym we use here for general allocation, and TAM for target allocation money. So how this kind of works in practice. So you have all these 20 slots. You have to get to roster compliance. You have a salary cap that probably eats up about half of all of the budget charges. And then to get under roster compliance, you add on the GAM, and then you add on the TAM to get the budget charges to stay below the roster compliant line. So it's a kind of a funny, cap system, but that's kind of the basics of it. So let's jump into roster management. So kind of we follow this in a couple, kind of in a this is our process for this. So we start with an audit. So what we'll do is look back at last window. If we're looking at a transfer window, or if we're looking at a season, we'll look at the previous season, look at what interventions we had, try to identify were we successful, were we unsuccessful, and get a real understanding for how did it go and what can we learn from that. The second is analyze. So we want to look at, okay, so we did our audit. Now, where are the places that we can really improve? What are the things that, one, we learned from the audit, and where are the things that we can also adjust and improve? And then the last is plan. So after you've done the audit and analyze, then we start to kind of structure a whole plan of how we're going to go, how we're going to approach this window or this season. There's a couple different, kind of timelines we look at. And really what that leaves is once you've done your salary cap analysis, your roster management, it's called analysis, it gives you a bit of a roadmap. So we say, okay, this is a general direction that we're going to go. And now we have to kind of put the puzzle pieces together to make this kind of period of time, this window successful, this season successful, but also know that we may have to adjust because, like I said a little while ago, your best laid plans could change in the flip of a dime. You could have a player that's brought up to us that's very interesting and we have to change, or you could have a player that you're in the, you always say at the you're close to signing, and then in a flip of a dime, okay, like a Belgian club offers them a better deal and they're going elsewhere. Or a pretty common thing we have is that we talk to a player and then they're like, yeah, we're in, and then they start seeing how far away Vancouver is from Europe, and they're like, oof, I don't know if I want to move my family that far away. So there's a lot of things. Deals can break down in the last second, so we always have to be agile. And that kind of, so then the last piece of this is once we have that roadmap, then we kind of jump into our scouting and recruitment. So when we look at scouting and recruitment, we have kind of 4 general ways that we have players inputted into the system. So you have analytics, connections. I'll say connections are, it could be like transfer room, if you guys are familiar, or, a friend of a friend that says, hey, look at this player. You have your scouts who are always looking and they have their own kind of network. And then, one of the main ones is agents. My phone is constantly getting messages from different agents saying, hey, what about this guy? What about that guy? And so they all get inputted into the system. And this is just a basic kind of diagram. We want to look at, the positional requirements that we're looking for, and then try to meet that with the abilities of a player. And then hopefully that we're trying to get that to fit into our playing style from attacking and defending, and then hopefully having the player's contribute to the output. And again, it goes back to this idea of output rather than outcome. So the one part I didn't really talk about when we went through that list is analytics. As that's my background, I think that's probably where the best kind of space to spend a little bit of time on. So I'm going to kind of walk you through a bit of how do we use analytics here at the club, and how does we use analytics across the club from, our physical prep, but in scouting and recruitment, we use it to try to take a player pool and shrink that down to a manageable amount of names that we can then take a look at. So let's jump into a bit of an example here. So if we were to say we're going to look for a midfielder, given our league strengths, there are probably around 1,000 professional players who could play midfield for the Vancouver Whitecaps. So if we were to say we're going to look at 1,000 players, one of our kind of key, one of our parameters of our scouting recruitment, we want, before we make a decision on players, we want our scouts to have looked at least 4 matches. So that's six hours of footage. If we're to look at 1,000 players for one position, that would be 6,000 hours. Given the size of our club and the size of our scouting staff, we would never make a decision. It would never happen. It would just take way too long. So just by, let's see, if we were to look, so let's say we're looking for a midfielder, we're looking for a midfield, we play with a midfield 3. For example, we're looking for a lone 6, we play with a lone 6, so that's what we're going to look for. We want that player to be a midfielder, a ball-winning midfielder, has the ability to switch play. So you can go through all of these different things to kind of shrink that search down of what we're looking for. Now, ultimately, this approach will cause us to miss on a few players, but in this process, it allows it to shrink the amount of players we're looking at to a manageable level. So I won't get into exactly how we shrink that down because that's a bit of the secret sauce, but I will say that we have, we have positional profiles for every single position on the pitch of what we're looking for to meet our style of play. And that allows us to shrink 1,000 down to, let's say, 20 to 30 players that we first send to our scouts to take a look at. So then if you do that, you're looking at 4 matches. We're probably looking at 300-400 hours that we need out of our scouts, which is attainable because we're very rarely looking at one position. We're looking at 2 or 3 positions. So this is kind of key to our strategy to being as efficient as possible with the resources that we have. So with that, even when you whittle that down and you have a list of 20 players, the analytics create a picture of what the player is, but we still very firmly believe that scouting and having live scouting, video scouting is very important to our process because they are the ones that kind of put the color into the picture. So make it a little bit clearer. Analytics is just a tool, as scouting is just a tool. Live scouting is just a tool. So you need to have both to be able to make good decisions. And one of the examples we had, and I bring up Julian Gressel, who's no longer with us, but we brought him in 2022. And from the analytics standpoint, one of the games he played, our analytics staff said, wow, he had an unbelievable game, a ton of key passes. But we had one of our scouts watch the same game, and they pointed out to 7 or 8 times that he made the wrong decisions based on our tactics. So it's a very, without a scout watching the game, we would have not gotten the complete picture. We would have just said, wow, what a great game. But in reality, from a coaching perspective, from a scouting perspective, he didn't make all the right decisions. Now, the output or the outcome was still not bad, or the outcome was still not bad, but the output was not what we were looking for. So anyways, that's kind of a brief overview of kind of my role here. So how is it going? We talked about at the beginning that in 2019 we were struggling. There was an article that was just published by The Athletic by Tom Bogart. He had some very nice things to say. He said, quietly in the Northwest, the Vancouver Whitecaps are building something great. We just re-signed our head coach who's been here for 2 years. And this is kind of the MLS, insider said Vancouver should be viewed as one of the favorites to win the Western Conference in 2024. So that's great. And then we just had our last, in our playoff game, which we unfortunately lost. We had 30,000 in the stadium, which is a record for us. So there's a lot of energy around the city about our team. And we're really excited to see people coming back and having an interest in football here in Vancouver. Lastly, here's again that image that I showed you guys at the beginning. In 2020, we got a little bit better, but not much. We're still a pretty bad team. 2021, we took actually a pretty good step. 2022, we took another small step. But this year, our expected goal differential was amongst the top 10 in the league. And something that we feel we are getting to the point of having sustained success at the club. And, there's, like I said at the beginning, we're taking good steps, but we still have another step to go. And we're in the middle of a very important window here to take this group to the next level. But overall, I'm very proud of a lot of the work, and it's not just me. There's a lot of great people at this organization that have pushed this club in a better direction. And I'm really proud of the work that we've done here. So we got more to come, but yeah, we're in a decent spot. But anyways, that's my presentation. Thank you very much. I appreciate all of you for taking the time to listen to this.
Yeah, thank you so much, Quinn. Really, really fascinating to see all the work that you guys have been doing to follow basically even your journey from 2019 to now, and seeing how the results are also improving and are there, right? The output is also there, right? So you mentioned how Vancouver is quite far removed from many of the other cities, obviously in the Northwest. You're recruiting globally. How, like, what would you say is your identity as a club? And when you compete against franchises like LAFC, who have just hit the 1 billion mark in franchise valuation, and if we compare that to Vancouver, who sit ranked 25 at this point with 410 according to Forbes, how do you compete with these big franchises from a soccer perspective, where at this point you're sitting with squad valuation at ranked 17th? You have had a solid league performance, making the playoffs. How do you compete with that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the quick answer is that, you know, we understand that we have to be more than the sum of our parts. So in that recruitment process, we have to find good people first and foremost, guys that want to come in here and want to work. We've been really fortunate to have some terrific people that have come in here over the last few years that care about the club. And we have a really, really tight locker room of guys that care about one another. So that also makes it hard in the recruitment side, is that we have to be careful about, you know, the people that we bring in here. But yeah, I think for us, that's the way that you overcome maybe the financial deficit, as well as in our squad building. There are some teams in the league that you know, focus primarily on younger players. And when I joined the club, we had the youngest roster in MLS, but you guys could probably see by that expected goal differential, we weren't a very good team. So for us, one of the things we focus on a lot is that balance, right? Like a locker room, a team is a delicate ecosystem. And when we bring in young players, having a focus on putting them in the best position to be successful. So we've been very fortunate over the last couple of years to integrate Pedro Vite, an Ecuadorian player who, made his debut for the Ecuadorian national team this year. But he wouldn't be successful, in my opinion, if it wasn't for a player like Andres Cubas, who's one of the best defensive midfielders in the league, and plays in that midfield three, because he's allowed to do his thing and also know that Andres is behind him. We had another player, Ali Ahmed, who made his debut for the Canadian men's national team. And I think he also is a midfielder. And I think his success can also be attributed to playing beside, you know, Andreas Cubas. And another player we have is Alessandro Schoff, who played in the Bundesliga for a long time. And having that balance between young guys and players and older players that can help, you know, insulate those players when they join the group is really important. I think, you know, if you're looking at just a financial model, maybe it's better to just have young players and try to sell them. We saw a player like Jean Durand last year get sold for 16 million. But, you know, Chicago was not a very good team. So in that, we're trying to balance being successful while also developing young players. And I think you have to create a mix of the two.
Yeah. Well, that is always the interesting part for me on the MLS, as well as to see, okay, how do you not just look at the short-term success, but at the long-term success, but at the same time, you also want to make sure that you're having short-term success, right? So that is very, very interesting. And in the meantime, I have a few other questions for you, Quinn, but I would just encourage everyone to ask your questions, submit them in the chat box, and then we can address them in a couple of minutes. And you talked about young players, Quinn, about the development, bringing in, obviously you guys had a very young roster. Now you're focusing on creating a better balance between those two. And it seems like you have a very balanced team. In a couple of years, the MLS introduced the Next Pro. how is the next pro adding value to the overall league? How do you see that model? Obviously, you have been very involved in building those squads, but tell me a little bit more about how the MLS Next Pro adds more value to the overall roster management and recruitment.
Yeah, I didn't decided not to include that in the presentation just because for the time we have here. Our MLS Next Pro team, which is works more or less like a reserve league in Europe, is very important to what we do. And I was one of the first things that Axel kind of gave to me to run and get that off the ground. And I think to me it works in kind of two ways. One, we have an academy, as most European clubs do, and the issue without a second team is, in the MLS, we have senior and reserve minimums. We have minimum salary contracts at the MLS, and they're very high compared to what you would get in Europe if you were a 17, 18-year-old, and so I think psychologically it's a really big issue for young players that maybe were very good at the U17 level to then be signing these, substantial contracts on the first team when they're not really ready for it. So the MLS Next Pro team allows a space where these guys can go and compete, and ultimately instead of being given an opportunity, just given an opportunity, that they have to go earn it. And as well, it's a great integration piece. Our second team and our first team train together 2 days of the week, that they get the reps and get to see how things work at the first team and kind of cut their teeth. The other side of it is it allows us to take bets on players from around the world. So we brought in, this past window, we brought in three players from Africa, who are, unfortunately, due to the immigration in Canada, it's taken a long time for them to get here. But it gives us an opportunity, rather than having to stick those on our roster and not knowing what they are, give them a year or two to develop at the second team, to then make the jump. And for us, the second team, moving guys from the second team to the first team, is we want to have those players be as ready as possible to contribute when they make it to the first team. And without the second team, you have guys that perhaps are just sitting on the bench, right? The issue before we had the second team is we had guys that were on first team contracts, so making good money, not getting minutes, and they were making too much money to loan them out. So no team could take them around the world. And so the second team has been really key to our success. I brought up Ali Ahmed, who, we also kind of caveat this. We've only had a second team for 2 years now. And over that period of time, we've been able to move 4 players to the first team. And 3 of those players have been, big contributors. We've had Simon Betcher, who went on a scoring tear at the first half of the season. We have Ali Ahmed, who's now with the Canadian men's nationals. He played a lot for us this year. And Levante Johnson, who started our Canadian championship final game and contributed, was part of the 20-man roster for the majority of the games throughout the season. And then we have a goalkeeper, which is obviously a bit of a different situation. Goalkeepers need a little bit more time, but he spent most of the time with the second team. But we've been able to show over the last couple of years that, the strategy that we put in place when we brought the second team has actually come to fruition. And I think that, from the higher ups, our ownership group gives us a little bit more buy-in into now taking some bets on guys from around the world to try to bring them in and continue to develop them.
Yeah. Well, I will start going through some of the questions that our audience is asking, Quinn. And we have Colin Fritz, who's asking, when you do your scouting, do you have any specific region that you place emphasis on? If so, why or why that region?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, we definitely do focus on specific regions. Part of that is based on the calendar. So we'll focus more time in the winter window for those leagues that end at the end of December, because you have a greater opportunity to get guys that are out of contract. So financially it makes more sense. And then there's, generally we will look at, we're not looking at the Prem, we're not looking at the Bundesliga. Like, those are those guys are on so much money that most of the guys in those leagues would automatically be DPs for MLS teams. So even the championship, like the salary is so high. But I would say generally, we're looking at second division. The second Bundesliga is a really, really strong league, and I think compares pretty well to the MLS. And then so that's kind of a broad answer. So we look at the calendar, we look at, the fit based on how players have transitioned to the MLS. And then we also look at culturally. So we brought in a Japanese goalkeeper this year, and actually had quite a bit of success because in Vancouver here, there's a large Japanese, Chinese, Korean population. And those guys find it easier to transition than maybe players out of South America. It takes a little bit more time because there's not a lot of Spanish speaking people in Vancouver. So I wouldn't say it's an exact science, but there definitely, and I maybe can't speak to exactly all the leagues we look at, but there is a science to which leagues we look at what time. But even if we're looking, I'm saying right now we're looking at, the leagues that finish in December for this upcoming window. We're also looking for 2025 winter window, which guys are coming out a year later, and trying to kind of map out what the next few years look like. So you're always looking at all of them, but for different windows, if that makes sense. Like in the summer, we're spending more time focused on Europe because those contracts are ending there. And also it's a time, even if they are under contract, that teams are re-looking at their roster and more willing to move than the European teams in the winter or mid-season, and are less likely to move a guy out or also buy a player, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, on the topic of recruitment, Alfred Finn Bogason is asking, are you looking into the age of players, and do you have a protocol on players that are 30 years or older?
Yeah, I mean, it just comes down to balance, right? Like if we look at our squad as an ecosystem and trying to identify, when I talk about that audit and analysis process, is do we need more leadership in our group? Do we need someone that can come in and be a presence? You're probably not going to find a 21-year-old that has a presence because they don't have the experience. But you also don't want to have too many young players. So when we're looking at, okay, when are we going to be moving out potentially some of our younger players, and you have teams that are interested, you get an idea of when a player may move out. That also kind of signals to us as well that it's an opportunity for us to bring in another young player. So, and I'd say as well, we're always looking for good young players, but those players usually, because they're more unproven, we want to try to get them younger, which means they mostly will go to the second team first. Now, that's a harder sell and something that we've been spending a lot more time on with different clubs and players around the world, is pitching them the idea of what our second team is and that it's a launching pad. But I think for all young players, for us at least, for us, all young players, you want to put them in a position to be successful. And when you buy a young player, you transfer a young player in, if you put them in a position that right off the bat, it's a sink or swim mentality. A lot of those guys can't do that because no matter where they're coming from, the MLS is a pretty unique league. It's very physical, and you need to have a bit of a plan on how you get them up to speed. And I think Pedro is a good example of that. Pedro Vite, who came in and we were patient with him. He actually played some games with the second team, even though, he was a significant transfer in, but giving him time to adapt and also spending a lot of time with him off the pitch to make sure that he has the resources to be successful. So that's a bit of a convoluted answer, but yes, we definitely do. The age is very, very important, but it's not like we only look at young players and we only look at old players. We look at our ecosystem and what does the team need.
So then the next question is focusing on Canadian football. And the question here by Roger Hampel is, what is your relationship with the Canadian League? And do you have a partner club there, for example, to train their young talents?
Yeah, I mean, I think having a domestic league in Canada is fantastic. And we're a big supporter of the CPL because we need to have more opportunities here in Canada for professional football. Do we have a partnership? No. Do we have a relationship with every team? Absolutely, we do. But I think it's, that's the CPL is a growing league, and they're trying to figure out their place in this ecosystem. And it's not, they haven't maybe completely figured out. Like if you look at the CPL, they probably have a little bit older squads. And so it's not as easy for us to, we'd ideally love to loan more of our young players to the CPL, but, they're looking to win, especially now with the Champions Cup, there's more opportunity for CPL teams to get into the Champions Cup or Champions League, however you want to call it, that they're looking to win. They play older squads. And so it's been harder for us to get maybe some of our younger players in, but it doesn't mean that that's wrong. That's their approach, and we'll continue to work with them. And at the end of the day, we all want to see Canadian soccer continue to grow, and we play a part in that, and same as the CPL club. So I think there will continue to be more and more opportunities to try to, sort things out, and hopefully there's more CPL players that we're looking to bring in for our first team, and we can do business with those clubs as well. I think on the recruitment side, it's a bit of a feeling out process. It's a really young league, and there's not a lot of precedent for players from CPL jumping in directly to the MLS and finding success. There's players like Mo Farsi that have done very well at Columbus, but they spend time at the second team as well, and they need time to adapt. And I think for me, that's a big part of this, is that no matter where you bring the player in, even if they're Canadian, it takes time to adapt to our style of play, to this environment, to the city. And I think, there will, with that, there's a lot of opportunities to do some stuff with CPL clubs, but yeah, we would love to do more. We just haven't completely, we haven't figured that out at this point yet, I'd say, the way we want to. So yeah, there's a lot of opportunities there, and hopefully in the future, there's more kind of interaction between the clubs.
Yeah, for sure. And the league is still young, right? So, but even the fact that there is a competitive league will really contribute, hopefully on the long run, also to the development of soccer in Canada overall, right? We have Nicholas Tate, who says, "Hi, Quinn, I appreciate your time. And I wanted to ask about interleague player transactions using GAM or player-for-player trades. Do you think in the future the amount of player transactions within the league will increase?"
I don't know if it will increase. I'm not sure if it will. I think over the years, we've seen it stay fairly stable. I mean, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but, there's always a market within the league, because as I talked about with young players coming in and like adapting to the style of play, to the city, it's one less thing you have to worry about in terms of MLS players and trades, because the player already knows what it's like to play in the MLS, and it is a unique challenge. One thing we haven't really touched on is the travel. There's everywhere you go, you got to fly, and it's a lot different than Europe in that way. And some guys that you bring in from Europe, they really struggle with that. So if you have a player that has been, successful in the MLS, they definitely have a market in the MLS, because there's a little more certainty of what you're going to get from that player. So I don't know. It's hard to say if it's going to go up or down. I know there's been conversations about, it being opening it up from trades to actually selling players with money. And I think if that got put in, then I think it would increase the amount of movement, so that every team was treated, every trade was treated like a transfer as it was from, Europe to North America. Then I think that would increase. But the way it is right now, I think if it continues this way, it will kind of stay the same, because I will say that trades are very complicated because you're not, how do you value a player? What do you, it's easier to value a player if you're purchasing them, because you have all these comparables. When it's a trade, there isn't a ton of trades, and you'll see the valuations kind of go up and, very inconsistent. So a lot of the times the trades are just mostly based to, in my opinion, like how much GAM is in the market. So that's the one thing. If you sell a player to Europe, then you can take a portion of that money back as league allocation GAM. So if that happens a lot in off season, then you'll see more trades, and that's kind of the direct kind of direct impact of those kind of moves.
Yeah, and that is what makes the MLS league more complicated as well. The fact that all the players are owned really, or the rights of the players are owned by the MLS, right? So we have about 5 minutes left, and I have one more last question from the audience for you, Quinn, which I thought is very interesting. You talked about the analytics, you talked about scouts and agents as well. And here's a question by Fernando Tomasello, who says, North American young players under 16 are playing in many different European leagues at a high level. How can they be known in systems of analytics or even the scouting system of a club like Vancouver without using representatives or agencies?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a really good question. And it's actually one of the downfalls of data. So when I guess it's a good caveat as well, like on the, we use analytics for the first team scouting. And for me, I'll say for us, analytics data is not just event level optical tracking data of what happens on the pitch. It's also things like surveys. And you maybe saw on my slide of when I worked in data science, one of the things was Survey Monkey, and we had a thing that said Power Apps, which is like we're a Microsoft company. So data is information, and so when we're looking at guys that are in the academy system, it's mostly going to be scouting, but we still use that as, it's not traditional analytics, but they are doing, our scouts from the academy side are doing evaluations of players that give us some kind of analytics feel to it with some numbers, and then also their subjective reports on it. But yeah, for sure, data, one of the downfalls of it is it's easy to, it doesn't help you find the players that have not yet arrived. It may identify players that have just arrived in a very small sample size that have started to really perform, but finding guys that are playing in U17, U15 competitions are just not data sets that actually exist. So you need to have that balance of also having scouts on the ground and having connections. But ideally, that's not, it's very hard to do that through agents because there's so many agents that are just pitching you young players. It's much easier when you have scouts on the ground that are watching the game, that are identifying, getting to know the families, the players, and selling them on what we do here and why this is the right place for them. If it's the agent that is pitching to us, honestly, you can't even get through all of the names of guys, and you can't get footage on the guys. It's very hard to make a decision. So it's much easier when you have someone that's in the market, has connections, and is identifying the players themselves. But that's, can be a very expensive process. So we're still working through, honestly, that's one of the things I'd say is one of our areas that we can improve on, is trying to figure out a real process for how we better identify young players, if it's Canadian, American, those in Europe, that we can continue to monitor. Now, most of our focus will be in Canada, just based on FIFA rules and laws. But yeah, it really, to me, that question more outlines how important scouts are for a club. It's not just data. You need to have a complete approach to identifying talent.
Yeah. Well, we're coming to the end of our time here. But seeing how intentionally you approached even your whole career, you told us about many of your role models also that helped you walk in this journey of yours to where you are now in the senior director position. But from your perspective, to leave us with this, what crucial traits do you believe differentiate successful sports management professionals from the rest, and what kind of an advice would you give others that are kind of aspiring for a career in professional sports?
Yeah, I think, advice, I would say, say yes. If someone's giving you an opportunity to do something and you don't have a background or you don't know where to start, saying yes is one of the things that helps you out the most. Getting involved, right? It's one thing to, I was sitting in university reading different journals or websites and saying, okay, I get this. You don't really get it until you jump in there and actually have to do it yourself. And I think that was, one of the things I really learned from working with the men's hockey team is I was like, oh, I know analytics. And then you step in there and you have to do it. You deal with the problems. You have issues with your tracking system. You mess up talking to the coach and you're like, oh, okay, I'm embarrassed, but you learn from that experience and you get better. And I think if it was, and then you take on the internships as well, it's just growing your experience base so that when you get into a position where you have to execute, you feel prepared for the opportunity rather than thinking you may be ready for this opportunity. Is if you've had these conversations with different people and different experiences, you have something to kind of fall back on, right? And I think that's what I would kind of suggest to everybody here. And university is such a great opportunity for that. Like I said at the beginning, is that there's no pressure on you. If you mess something up, it's not like it's life or death. It's not like we're making a decision on transferring a player in. It's you're a volunteer more or less. So some people say, oh, I need to make money. Okay, great. I mean, obviously everybody has different financial situations. You may need to make some money, but when there's not money involved, it also means that the pressure's less and you get to learn. The first question about what is the difference between professionals, sports professionals that are successful, I think it's a really hard question to answer because I think I think having the ability to analyze and reflect and be self-reflective and realize when you're wrong is very, very key. If you're stubborn into this is the right way to do things and there's no other way of doing it, you're going to fail because this ecosystem changes all the time. And if you don't have a group that's open-minded, that you can challenge each other, then I haven't been a part of a situation where that's been successful. To me, it's about being with not just yourself open-minded, but finding yourself within a group that's also open-minded and ready to change and adapt to the situation that's in front of you. So yeah, hopefully that helps in some way.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Quinn, for your time, and Edgar, I'll pass it to you.
Okay, thank you, Johannes, and of course, thank you, Quinn. Unfortunately, we're out of time now, and a couple of questions still on the chat box, but maybe for the next time. And yeah, really appreciate your time, Quinn, and of course, Johannes. Thank you for sharing such interesting insights, and of course, the strong messages like say yes and get involved and keep it proactive. Very, very strong messages. And yeah, it was a real pleasure to having you both, and to the next time. On behalf of Johan Cruyff Institute, I want to thank everyone again for attending the session. And you will soon receive a link with the webinar recording in case you want to watch the session again. We invite you to stay connected and keep an eye to our social media channels where you can find updates about sport content, resources, next webinars, and so on. Thanks again, and see you the next time. Bye-bye, guys.
Thank you.